This is our Week 1 review video, Summer 2020. We are English Composition 2. We will meet Mondays 9 to 11:30, and all of the other days will be online. Our classroom is the Academic Success Center in the Industrial Education Building, room 113. My contact information is on our syllabus, which is on our Blackboard page under Information and Syllabus. You can contact me you can either call my landline, email me, or text my cell phone. I'm pretty responsive via email and text, especially in the summer, because I know we have a condensed format. The textbook is optional. I use this textbook for quite a few things, and I pull a lot of material from it, and I strongly recommend it because it will help you a lot with writing in college and all kinds of classes. I also recommend it because it is very tiny and costs about 10 bucks on Amazon. Note we use the 4th edition, which is not the most recent edition. It's from 1999. It looks like this. Looks like this. It's got gray with the red writing, and you can find it for $4 on Thrift Books. That's pretty nice. Amazon usually has it for about 10. Target's got it for 5. It is very useful. It is only about 50 or 60 pages, and it's been around for about 100 years, literally, in its original form. So I strongly recommend it. It is not like most textbooks. The other important things on the syllabus are the point system. We have 100 points total in the class, 4 essays, 4 outlines, 4 journals. Basically, that means you cannot miss any assignments. You need to make sure that you are keeping up. We're going to have one outline each week, one major assignment, usually an essay each week, and we'll usually have a journal. This week we don't have a journal, and I'll get to why. It's because our major assignment is pretty time consuming. The other thing that's important about the syllabus, now that's it. So our other materials on the Blackboard page are all under week 1. And the most important thing for this whole class that you need to know is how to write an arguable thesis. A thesis is, of course, simply a main idea. You're probably familiar with the term hypothesis from science class. You come up with a hypothesis, and then you perform the experiment, and then you record your observations, and the hypothesis may stay the same, or it may change. You say, I've got the blue liquid and the red liquid. I'm going to put them together. I'm going to blow my eyebrows off and create a purple liquid. Then you do it, and then your hypothesis either stays the same or changes. Same thing here with a thesis. So an arguable thesis is simply a fancy way of saying a main idea that is worth arguing about. That is what something that is arguable is, worth arguing about. And this document's fairly detailed, and I'll go over the broad points. Basically, the reason that you need to have an arguable thesis in a comp class is because we're not just writing book reports. You want to have something worthwhile to say. If you're not coming up with an argument, then there's no point to it, right? Just as in Comp 1, I say that anything we read has to have conflict. Any story, movie, anything has to have conflict. Otherwise, what's the point? An arguable thesis provides that conflict in an essay. You're making an argument, you have a statement. I mean, think about all the political stuff you've seen on TV lately, or ever. Imagine if everybody agreed on everything. There'd be nothing to watch, right? Now, I'm not saying that political conflict is good, but it wouldn't be there if there wasn't an argument, right? So that's why an arguable thesis is the center of our class and of all the stuff that we're going to write. The best way to come up with an arguable thesis is to make a comparison. You want to compare two things, and the format that I use is X is more Y than Z, where X and Z are the two things that you're comparing, and Y is kind of the fulcrum, the basis of comparison. I use an example from the short story A&P on the handout. Sammy is the main character, the narrator of A&P, and Queenie is the girl who walks into the store in her bathing suit, and this is 1960 or whatever, so this is a big deal. And Sammy is usually thought of as being kind of a sympathetic character because we're in his head. He's the narrator. So if I say that Queenie is more sympathetic than Sammy, there's an argument there because a lot of readers find Sammy relatively sympathetic, or at the very least we understand what's going on in his head because we're there. We're not in Queenie's head, so we don't know what's going on. So there is an argument there. X is more Y than Z. And this helps us kind of get below the surface of the text and sort of figure out what's going on in the story. It's also a good basis for an essay. I have another template, which is that you can use, the story seems to be about Y, but it's really about Z. And the same thing is going on here. There's an argument here. I use the Hunger Games as an example. Most people think the Hunger Games are about government oppression, but really they're about bringing children into the 21st century here in America, right? If you've read the Hunger Games, you know both of those things are major themes, but there's definitely an argument to be made there. There are 3 rules when it comes to an arguable thesis, and they're simple. You need to make an argument, you need to have some kind of comparison, and they need to be one simple sentence. And in class yesterday, I refined this a little bit further, and I said, oh, come on, where's the strike through? I'm good at this. There we go. All right. Oh no, I'm still in strike through. Oh, what have I done? What have I done? Compare 2 things that are as similar as possible. And I realize that's below this in bold down here, but I'm putting it down twice because it's very important. You need to compare 2 things that are as similar as possible. And the way I explain this in the handout is by using singers. Who's the best singer of all time or something like that? Yeah. And I use Aretha Franklin and Britney Spears to give an example. Now, if you know anything about music or singing, you may know that Aretha Franklin is considered one of the best singers of all time. And if you know anything about Britney Spears, you know that she's got some commercial success, but she's typically not considered a singer on par with some of the best actual singers around. And I go into detail on this, but essentially the 2 things you think about when you're comparing things for your thesis are how much evidence am I going to find to support this idea, and who is going to argue with me? Because remember, an arguable thesis, you want it to make an argument or create an argument. So think about this. If you say that Aretha Franklin is a better singer than Britney Spears, not many people are going to argue with you on that. Some might, some hardcore Britney Spears fans. But even if you like Britney Spears, it's difficult to say that she's a better singer. And notice I'm not saying better musician, more commercially successful, better dancer, any of that. I'm saying singer, right? And Britney Spears is famous for using auto-tune. And I'm not hating on her for that. I'm just saying it's well known. So you're going to have an uphill battle, convincing people that Aretha Franklin is not one of the greatest singers of all time. So if this is your thesis, okay, we're making an argument. We're using X is more Y than Z. It's one simple sentence. But the problem is we're not comparing things that are as similar as possible, because very few people are going to argue with this. And you're going to find a lot of evidence supporting the idea that Aretha Franklin is one of the best singers of all time. And you're going to find plenty of evidence supporting Britney Spears, but you're also going to find a lot of evidence that criticizes her as a singer. So this is too easy. It's not very arguable. And the problem is we're not comparing 2 things that are similar as possible. And I go into detail on this on page 3 here. We'll skip over it a little bit. So we have a non-arguable thesis. We have a thesis that is defensible. It's easy to defend because remember, we're going to find a lot of evidence that supports how great Aretha Franklin is. But not many people are going to argue, so it's not an arguable thesis. How do we fix that? We flip it, and this is important. Remember this. Flip it. And if you have not, I'm gonna ruin your brain here. If you're not familiar with the song "Whip It" by Devo, you should watch it, and it will jump into your brain, and it'll stick there forever. And you'll hate me for introducing you to Devo, who is one of the more mediocre bands of the '80s. And every time you hear it in your head, instead of saying whip it, you'll hear flip it. So you'll be really good at arguable thesis stuff forever, and you'll grow up and be a successful politician and make a lot of money and have a lot of power, and you'll think back one day sitting on the big porch of your California mansion, and you'll thank me. So watch that music video. We flip it. So what does that mean? Well, if we have X is more Y than Z, when we say Aretha Franklin is a better singer than Britney Spears, we simply flip that to say Britney Spears is a better singer than Aretha Franklin. And suddenly, we have kind of the opposite. We have an uphill battle. It's going to be harder to find evidence to support that than it would the other version, and more people are going to argue. So, and again, I get into detail on this, but basically, that helps us know what side of the scale we're on. Are we being safe, or are we creating an argument? Now, I have a really fancy paint drawing here to put this into image form. And basically, when you have your thesis, if it's really arguable, then everyone argues. Who argues? Everybody. And how much evidence do you find? Not a lot. And if your thesis is too safe, if it's too defensible, it's easy to defend because you find tons of evidence. But it's also easy to defend because nobody argues with you. Remember, if I say that Aretha Franklin's a better singer than Britney Spears, then few people argue with me. So the trick is we need to compare people or things as similar as possible. And my solution with our example is to bring in Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston, also considered one of the all-time greats, is not only like Aretha Franklin in that way, but she is closer to Aretha Franklin's style. She's closer stylistically than Britney Spears is, because Britney Spears is a pop singer from the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st, and Aretha Franklin is far, far earlier. Whitney Houston is later than Aretha Franklin, but stylistically they're much more similar, and it is generally agreed that they're both really, really strong singers. That's what they're known for. Whereas Britney Spears is more known for dancing and pop production and things of that nature. So, and being controversial. So we're comparing two things that are much more similar, and that is the takeaway with an arguable thesis. You want to make sure that you're comparing things as similar as possible. The handout gets into this in greater detail and really goes into why that matters. And this second version of the graphic shows us where we're going to land on the scale with all of these example thesis statements, and it shows us what grade our essay might be aiming for based on our thesis. So that's important. Your thesis can put you on the right or wrong track for a grade in an essay right from the very start. So take a look at this document, and as always, email me if you have any questions or concerns.